The Gilded Age, a singular epoch in time when American dreams crystallized into fortunes so magnificent they transformed ordinary mortals into titans whose wealth eclipsed the treasuries of ancient kingdoms. And during this extraordinary era, when a handful of families controlled riches that dwarfed the treasuries of European kingdoms, marriage wasn't just about love. It was the ultimate merger and acquisition strategy that could create or destroy financial dynasties overnight. Yet when these carefully orchestrated marriages crumbled, the resulting legal warfare consumed millions in legal fees, while newspaper headlines tracked every scandalous revelation. Personal vendettas between former spouses could trigger stock market crashes, destroy business partnerships that had dominated American commerce for decades, and scatter fortunes that had taken generations to accumulate. Thus, what began as private marital disputes evolved into public spectacles that could topple industrial empires, bankrupt entire families, and reshape the economic landscape of a rapidly growing nation. Today, we share how the most explosive divorces in American history brought down Gilded Age family empires that once seemed too powerful to fail. The Astor family built their fortune by buying Manhattan real estate when it was still considered a risky investment in undeveloped swampland. Margaret Astor built her legacy by making an even riskier investment, betting her entire inheritance on the revolutionary idea that women deserved basic human dignity. While her relatives counted their millions in marble palaces, she was busy discovering that aristocratic privilege stops exactly where inconvenient moral principles begin. The same family that had conquered American high society through strategic marriages and calculated social climbing couldn't understand why she refused to stay quietly miserable for their benefit. Margaret's rebellion against dynastic expectations triggered a family civil war that would have made medieval royal courts seem civilized by comparison. Her relatives wielded their considerable influence like weapons specifically designed to destroy anyone who threatened their carefully constructed social empire. In today's episode of Old Money Allure, we explore how one woman's refusal to be a decorative family asset became the foundation for building something far more valuable than inherited wealth. In 1853, Margaret Laura Carey was born into the kind of wealth that could literally buy Manhattan, and in many cases already had. Her maternal grandparents, William Backhouse Astor Sr. and Margaret Rebecca Armstrong, had transformed John Jacob Astor's fur trading fortune into a real estate empire that dominated New York City. By the time Margaret came of age, her aunt Caroline Schermerhorn Astor ruled the exclusive 400 with absolute authority, determining who mattered in American high society and who remained forever banished from its glittering circles. Margaret's 1875 marriage to Baron Alphonse Lambert Eugene Ritter de Stuers seemed like a fairy tale, worthy of the society pages that breathlessly covered every detail of Gilded Age elite romance. At 22, she wed a Dutch diplomat, 12 years her senior, in a union that perfectly merged American wealth with European nobility, creating exactly the kind of international alliance that validated the Astor family's global ambitions. They had 4 children together, though one tragically died in childhood, and lived in magnificent style across Europe's most prestigious diplomatic capitals, from London to Paris to Madrid. Her annual income of $80,000 from the Astor family fortune meant she wanted for absolutely nothing material that money could provide. But behind the embassy parties, continental sophistication, and diplomatic glamour, Margaret's marriage was deteriorating into something far more sinister than mere aristocratic incompatibility. The Baron had mastered the art of public charm while subjecting his wife to what court records would later describe with chilling precision as everyday cruelty. When not performing for society's benefit at glittering receptions and state dinners, he systematically terrorized Margaret with threats that chilled her to the very bone. His most devastating weapon was his plan to have her committed to Paris's notorious Hospice de la Salpêtrière, an institution infamous throughout Europe for its brutal treatment of women deemed hysterical by their husbands or families. For 17 grueling years, Margaret performed the ultimate acting role of her life, the perfect, dutiful, aristocratic wife who smiled through every public appearance. She graciously hosted European nobility at elaborate dinner parties, while secretly fearing for her sanity, her freedom, and her very survival. She maintained the flawless facade that her family's sterling reputation demanded, all while her husband plotted against her inheritance and threatened to have her declared mentally unstable. The Baron's threats weren't idle posturing. Commitment to an asylum could legally strip her of everything she held dear, including custody of her children and control of her substantial fortune. Margaret's vast wealth came with invisible chains forged from family expectations and social obligations that bound her more tightly than any prison walls. Challenging her husband's authority could jeopardize not just her annual income, but her entire standing within the Astor dynasty that had shaped American high society for generations. By 1889, however, she had reached her absolute breaking point and made her first desperate, carefully planned attempt to escape her gilded prison. She was about to discover that even being born into America's most powerful and influential family offered no protection whatsoever when she dared to challenge the rigid social order they had created and maintained. Her first desperate bid for freedom would reveal just how ruthlessly the Astor family protected their reputation, and teach her that escape would require far more cunning than she had ever imagined. The brutal lesson began immediately when Margaret's first escape attempt in 1889 lasted exactly as long as it took for the shocking news to reach her Aunt Caroline's perfectly appointed Fifth Avenue mansion. The Mrs. Astor, undisputed queen of New York society and supreme architect of the exclusive 400, descended upon the situation with the swift efficiency of a seasoned general crushing a peasant rebellion before it could spread. Caroline personally forced Margaret back to Paris and her abusive husband, making it crystal clear through both words and actions that family reputation would always trump a niece's desperate pleas for help or freedom. The message rang through every marble corridor and gilded drawing room of the various Astor mansions. Divorce was absolutely not an option under any circumstances whatsoever, but Margaret had inherited far more than just money and social position from her illustrious lineage. She possessed the same cunning intelligence and ruthless determination that had originally built the entire Astor empire from nothing. When her uncle John Jacob Astor innocently showed her scenic photographs of a thriving frontier city called Sioux Falls, South Dakota, he unknowingly handed her the skeleton key to the freedom she so desperately craved. What he probably didn't mention during their casual conversation was that this picturesque prairie town had earned a scandalous reputation among the desperate wives of America's elite social circles. Sioux Falls had become known in whispered conversations as a mecca for the mismated, a place where unhappy marriages could be legally dissolved with surprising ease and remarkable speed. South Dakota's revolutionary divorce laws required only 90 days of residency and accepted grounds for dissolution that would be laughed out of courts in New York, Boston, or any other respectable eastern city. By 1891, Margaret had orchestrated her escape plan with the meticulous precision and careful attention to detail of a military operation designed to succeed against overwhelming odds. She would travel to Sioux Falls accompanied by her supposed chaperone, William Elliot, who was actually her devoted lover, and her faithful dog, Tweedle, establishing legal residency while the rest of polite society remained blissfully unaware of her true intentions. The moment Margaret stepped off the dusty train at the Sioux Falls depot, she detonated a social bomb that exploded across America's newspaper front pages from coast to coast. The Philadelphia Record breathlessly reported with obvious excitement that now that a niece of William Astor has joined the divorce colony in Sioux Falls, the South Dakota style of severing matrimonial bonds may become more popular than heretofore. Suddenly, this remote frontier outpost found itself hosting genuine American royalty in pursuit of something that all their millions couldn't buy back east: legal freedom from the bonds of marriage. Margaret took up residence at the comfortable Cataract House Hotel, enduring her mandatory 90-day waiting period, while newspapers tracked her every movement with the intensity of modern paparazzi following a celebrity scandal. She attempted to integrate herself into the local community and society, even generously donating 3 elaborate stained glass windows to the prestigious St. Augusta Episcopal Church as a gesture of goodwill and religious devotion. The generous gesture backfired spectacularly when Bishop William Hobart Hare, a man who had gladly accepted substantial Astor family philanthropy for years, publicly condemned her presence in his city as fundamentally immoral and corrupting. As her scheduled February 1892 trial date approached with inexorable certainty, Margaret braced herself for a legal battle that would expose her most private torment to merciless public scrutiny and judgment. She expected her vindictive husband to fight dirty using every legal trick available, expected the sensation-hungry press to sensationalize every sordid detail, and expected proper society to judge her harshly for her unprecedented actions. What she didn't anticipate was that the courtroom would become the stage for a family betrayal so shocking it would make headlines across the nation, and that her own blood would deliver the cruelest blow of all. The devastating family treachery Margaret never saw coming would unfold when her divorce trial in February 1892 transformed an ordinary Sioux Falls courtroom into the most scandalous and closely watched theatre in all of America. Unlike the typical divorce proceedings in this frontier town, where defendants simply failed to appear and cases proceeded by default, Baron de Stuers mounted an aggressive and vigorous defence through his expensive legal team. This strategic decision ensured that Margaret would be forced to publicly relive and recount every humiliating detail of her 17-year ordeal for a courtroom packed with sensation-seeking spectators and eager newspaper reporters from across the nation. Her testimony painted a devastating and heart-wrenching portrait of sophisticated psychological warfare disguised as respectable aristocratic marriage between refined European nobility. Margaret provided shocking details of her husband's systematic cruelty, his repeated threats to have her declared legally insane and committed to a notorious asylum, and his elaborate schemes to steal her substantial inheritance through legal manipulation. The packed courtroom heard testimony about how the Baron had plotted to strip her of her beloved children, her hard-won freedom, and her family fortune through false claims of mental instability that would render her legally powerless. Even the jaded residents of Sioux Falls, who had witnessed plenty of dramatic marital discord and scandalous divorce proceedings over the years, found themselves genuinely moved by her account of sustained psychological abuse. The testimony revealed a pattern of torment that included threats of commitment to Paris's infamous Hospice de la Salpêtrière, attempts to control her correspondence and social connections, and constant intimidation designed to break her spirit completely. Then came the moment that would haunt Margaret for the rest of her natural life and forever change her relationship with her own family. Her own brother, Arthur Astor Carey, took the witness stand in the crowded courtroom, but he appeared for the defence, not to support his sister's desperate plea for freedom. In a betrayal that would have impressed Judas Iscariot himself with its calculated cruelty, Arthur testified against his own flesh and blood sister, supporting the Baron's self-serving claims that he had treated Margaret with consistent kindness and proper consideration. This wasn't merely sibling rivalry or a family disagreement that had gotten out of hand. It was a cold, calculated family decision to sacrifice Margaret's well-being rather than allow her unprecedented actions to tarnish the precious Astor name through the scandal of divorce. Arthur's testimony represented the family's official position. They would rather see Margaret destroyed in court than risk their social standing by supporting her quest for freedom from an abusive marriage. Despite this devastating and utterly unexpected familial sabotage from her own brother, Margaret's compelling and detailed testimony proved powerful enough that the court granted her divorce decree on March 5, 1892. After 17 long years of systematic abuse and 2 grueling years of legal warfare against both her husband and her own family, she was finally legally free from the bonds that had imprisoned her. Any reasonable person might have quietly celebrated this hard-won victory, perhaps taken a long and restorative European tour, or simply enjoyed the unprecedented experience of being legally liberated from her tormentor without fanfare. Margaret, however, had never been accused of being particularly reasonable or conventional in her approach to life's challenges. On March 7, 1892, a mere 2 days after receiving her official divorce decree from the court, she married William Elliot Zborowski in what had to be the fastest divorce-to-remarriage turnaround in American legal and social history. The lightning speed of this romantic union provided her numerous critics and enemies with all the ammunition they needed to paint her as a calculating adulteress who had orchestrated the entire elaborate scheme from the very beginning. But Margaret had achieved something far more valuable than social acceptance or family approval. She had secured her freedom retained control of her fortune and found a husband who actually treated her with the respect and kindness she had been denied for nearly 2 decades. The burning question now was whether the powerful Astor family would be satisfied with their brutal public humiliation of her, or if they were prepared to make their complete rejection even more definitive and financially devastating. The Astor family's answer came swiftly and decisively. Margaret and Elliot Zborowski found themselves banished from American high society, like characters from a moral cautionary tale, facing a stark and uncompromising choice that would determine the rest of their lives together. They could either remain in New York and live as permanent social lepers, forever excluded from the circles they had once dominated, or reinvent themselves entirely across the Atlantic Ocean in more forgiving European society. They chose exile without hesitation, relocating to England, where divorce carried significantly less social stigma and where a dubious count and countess could still command considerable respect among those blissfully unfamiliar with their scandalous American past. Margaret's business acumen and financial intelligence proved every bit as sharp and sophisticated as her legendary survival instincts had been throughout her ordeal. In 1910, she made a bold power move that demonstrated her remarkable independence by purchasing the magnificent Hyam Park estate at Bridge, near Canterbury in Kent, for £17,500. She then immediately commissioned the prestigious architect Joseph Sawyer to execute an extensive £50,000 renovation of the property, an amount that represented 3 times the estate's original purchase price. This wasn't merely buying another house to live in comfortably, this was deliberately building a palace that would announce her complete financial independence despite her family's brutal rejection and social ostracism. The most delicious irony of her situation became increasingly apparent as the years passed. Despite being utterly ostracized by her own family, Margaret had clearly retained control of substantial Astor wealth through her own shrewd maneuvering. Her sophisticated financial operations included commissioning a 5-story building at 206 9th Avenue in New York City in 1899, proving she maintained both valuable American real estate investments and the necessary business connections to manage them effectively from abroad. The family that had so dramatically disowned her had completely failed to cut off her access to the fortune that continued to fund her increasingly fabulous and comfortable exile. Personal tragedy struck unexpectedly in 1903 when Elliot died in a racing accident at the dangerous La Turbie hill climb in France, leaving Margaret a widow at the age of 50. But she had experienced genuine love, partnership and mutual respect in her second marriage, something that had been entirely absent from her first union with the abusive Baron. She continued maintaining Hyam Park as a magnificent showcase estate, demonstrating remarkable resilience and determination, while her former family members likely assumed she was suffering in poverty and well-deserved disgrace. When Margaret finally died peacefully at Hyam Park on July 9, 1911, she left behind the ultimate proof of her complete triumph over her family's cruel rejection. Her son, Louis Zborowski, inherited a truly staggering fortune that made him the 4th richest under-21-year-old in the world, with cash of £11 million and real estate in the United States, including 7 acres of Manhattan and several blocks on 5th Avenue, New York. Louis would go on to achieve considerable fame in his own right by creating the legendary Chitty Bang Bang racing cars that would later inspire Ian Fleming's beloved children's story and movie. His remarkable success proved definitively that talent, innovation and achievement could flourish magnificently despite scandalous family origins and social ostracism. Louis's massive inheritance represented Margaret's absolutely perfect revenge against the family that had so cruelly expelled her to protect their precious reputation. She had not only survived their brutal rejection and systematic attempts to destroy her, but had actually accumulated personal wealth that completely dwarfed what they had tried so desperately to deny her. The final tally of her extraordinary life was nothing short of exquisite. The mighty Astor family had sacrificed Margaret to protect their carefully cultivated social reputation, but her story became infinitely more compelling and inspiring than their stuffy, conventional social conformity. She had successfully transformed herself from a dutiful society ornament into a pioneering woman who chose authentic love over hollow prestige, personal freedom over family approval, and hard-won financial independence over inherited dependency. Most satisfying of all, she had proven beyond any doubt that being kicked out of your inheritance could actually lead to building an even greater fortune, one earned through courage, intelligence, and determination rather than mere accident of birth. Margaret Astor's transformation from society ornament to financial powerhouse proves that sometimes being rejected by your family is the best thing that can ever happen to you. Most people think the Kardashians invented using marriage as a business strategy, but they're about a century and a half late to that particular party. Alva Vanderbilt perfected the art of matrimonial mergers long before prenups and reality TV cameras made such arrangements socially acceptable, treating high society like a conquerable fortress that just needed the right siege tactics. While modern celebrities might shock the world by divorcing after 72 days, 19th century society wives were expected to maintain their marriages even if their husbands collected mistresses like some men collect vintage wines. Breaking those rules required the kind of audacity that would make today's social media influencers seem positively timid by comparison. One woman possessed exactly that level of calculated boldness, along with enough strategic genius to turn a scandalous divorce into the foundation for reshaping American society. In today's episode of Old Money Allure, we reveal how one person's refusal to stay quietly miserable in a marble palace accidentally helped change the course of American history. If the Gilded Age had casting directors, they couldn't have picked a more perfect villain-heroine than Alva Erskine Smith. Born January 17, 1853 in Mobile, Alabama, to a cotton merchant whose Civil War losses would have made Gone with the Wind look like a minor inconvenience, Alva possessed the ambition of a military general and the social radar of a heat-seeking missile. The Vanderbilts, meanwhile, were America's wealthiest social rejects. Their new money railroad fortune, a jaw-dropping $94 million at the time, might as well have been Confederate currency at Mrs. Astor's legendary balls. The old guard Knickerbockers saw them as glorified train conductors, their bank accounts having the unfortunate aroma of coal and commerce rather than generations of inherited wealth. Enter William Kissam Vanderbilt, born December 12, 1849, a man whose temperament was as mild as his bank account was robust. Contemporaries described him as friendly, cultured, and even-tempered, which in the cutthroat world of Gilded Age marriages made him the perfect cash cow for an ambitious bride. Their 1875 wedding merged Alva's steel-trap social intelligence with William's bottomless bank account, a corporate merger disguised as a marriage. They produced 3 children, Consuelo, William Kissam, and Harold Sterling, while maintaining what modern therapists would diplomatically call irreconcilable differences. Historical accounts paint Alva as strong-willed, arrogant, ill-tempered, opinionated, liberated, and tyrannical. She reportedly dismissed her husband as a weak non-entity and called marriage legalized prostitution, sentiments rarely found in Victorian valentines. William, for his part, seemed content to fund his wife's social campaigns while spending as much time as possible aboard his yachts in the Mediterranean. When William Henry Vanderbilt died in 1885, leaving his son $65 million, roughly equivalent to Jeff Bezos finding loose change under his sofa cushions, Alva unleashed her master plan for social domination. Her opening salvo, a French chateau-style mansion on Fifth Avenue, so ostentatious it made Versailles look like a starter home. But the pièce de résistance in Alva's social warfare came on March 26, 1883, when she hosted a costume ball so lavish that its $250,000 price tag would make even modern Met Gala attendees clutch their pearls. The guest list was meticulously engineered with one target in mind, forcing Caroline Astor, New York's reigning social queen, to acknowledge the Vanderbilts' existence or doom her daughter to missing the event of the decade. Mrs. Astor capitulated, leaving her calling card at the Vanderbilt Mansion, the 19th century equivalent of being accepted into Harvard. Every newspaper in New York covered the triumph, and Alva's position as a social force was secured. She followed this victory by helping found the Metropolitan Opera as a direct challenge to the exclusive Academy of Music, which had excluded nouveau riche families like the Vanderbilts. Her crowning architectural achievement was Newport's Marble House, completed in 1892 at a cost that would make modern billionaires flinch, $11 million, with $7 million spent on marble alone. Designed as a temple to the arts, locals more accurately saw it as a temple to the almighty dollar. While Alva conquered society room by room, William found comfort elsewhere, establishing the Jockey Club, racing thoroughbreds, and allegedly enjoying the company of mistresses. Most deliciously scandalous were rumours of his affair with Consuelo Isnaga, the Duchess of Manchester, who happened to be Alva's childhood friend. The irony that his alleged mistress shared a name with his daughter provided endless fodder for society gossips. As the 1890s dawned, Alva had achieved everything she wanted: social dominance, architectural monuments to her ambition, and entree to every exclusive drawing room in New York and Newport. But beneath her triumph lurked a radical realization. She no longer needed William or his name. The social climbing scaffolding could now be dismantled, leaving only the question of how to exit a high-profile marriage without sacrificing her hard-won position. The answer would shock American society and ultimately help build its future. When most Gilded Age wives were perfecting needlepoint and producing heirs, Alva Vanderbilt was orchestrating social coups that would have impressed Machiavelli. Her infamous 1883 costume ball wasn't just a party. It was psychological warfare disguised as a social event, with every detail calibrated for maximum impact. The ball itself made modern celebrity galas look like kindergarten birthday parties. 1,200 guests arrived in costumes costing small fortunes. Mrs. Cornelius Vanderbilt II came dressed as an electric light bulb, complete with working battery, while Alva herself appeared as a Venetian Renaissance princess. The entire affair cost over $250,000, more than $5 million in today's currency, and transformed the Vanderbilts overnight from social outsiders to the epicenter of New York society. With society's gates successfully stormed, Alva advanced to her next objective: architectural dominance. The Fifth Avenue mansion featured a ballroom modelled after Versailles' Hall of Mirrors because subtlety was never Alva's strong suit. But her true monument to excess was Newport's Marble House, completed in 1892 at a cost of $11 million. With 500,000 cubic feet of marble, the cottage, Newport's charmingly misleading term for mansions, required 150 craftsmen working for 4 years. One visitor described it as a palace that makes the proud edifices of American royalty look like tenements. Between social triumphs and architectural statements, Alva revolutionized American culture by helping found the Metropolitan Opera in 1883. This direct challenge to the Academy of Music, which had limited boxes and excluded nouveau riche families, created a new cultural institution where wealth trumped lineage in securing the precious boxes that signified social arrival. While Alva waged her campaigns for social supremacy, William pursued his own interests with equal dedication. He established the Jockey Club, maintained racing stables, and spent increasingly little time in the marble palaces his wife was commissioning. Their marriage operated less like a romance and more like a business partnership with clearly defined roles. William provided unlimited funding, Alva provided the strategic vision for deploying it effectively. As the 1890s dawned, with her social position secure, Alva shifted focus to her daughter Consuelo's future. Pretty, wealthy, and now carrying the socially validated Vanderbilt name, Consuelo represented the ultimate trophy in Alva's social chess game. European aristocracy, cash poor but title rich, presented the perfect opportunity for a final social conquest that would transcend American shores. Meanwhile, William's interests increasingly drew him across the Atlantic as well, though for rather different reasons. His rumoured affair with Consuelo Isnaga, the Duchess of Manchester, provided endless whispers in drawing rooms on both continents. Society wits couldn't help noting the peculiar coincidence that his alleged mistress shared a name with his daughter, a fact that would have made Freudian analysts reach for their notebooks. The Vanderbilts' marital arrangements grew increasingly separate, with William aboard his yacht and Alva presiding over Newport's social season. She had effectively achieved independence within marriage, controlling vast resources, commanding social respect, and operating with minimal interference from her husband. The question lingering in the background was whether she still needed the Vanderbilt name at all, a potential catalyst for change appeared in the form of Oliver Hazard Perry Belmont, a wealthy family friend whose attention to Alva raised eyebrows in social circles. Whether their relationship began before or after her marital troubles deepened remains debated, but Belmont would soon play a crucial role in Alva's next social revolution. By early 1895, to 20 years of strategic marriage, both Vanderbilts had extracted what they needed from their union. William had secured his family's social position through Alva's machinations, while she had leveraged his fortune to achieve unprecedented social power. The stage was set for a dissolution that would shock society and establish new precedents for wealthy women seeking independence from unsatisfactory marriages. The woman who had conquered New York society was about to attempt her most daring maneuver yet, and American society would never be quite the same again. In March 1895, Alva Vanderbilt did something more shocking than wearing last season's fashion. She filed for divorce from William K. Vanderbilt on grounds of adultery. The news hit New York society like a locomotive at full steam, leaving diamond-encrusted monocles shattering across Fifth Avenue. Divorce in 1895 wasn't just scandalous, it was practically extraterrestrial among the social elite. When marriages soured, high society couples typically opted for discreet separation. He kept a mistress in Paris. She developed mysterious headaches, and both attended the same social functions with glacial politeness. Alva's decision to pursue a complete legal dissolution revealed the same tactical boldness that had characterized her social ascent. New York state law made divorce exceptionally difficult, with adultery standing as the only legal grounds until 1966. For most wives, this created an insurmountable barrier. But Alva had an ace up her silk sleeve. William's extramarital activities were apparently so well documented they could have filled a moderately sized library. Some historians suggest William may have cooperated in the proceedings, possibly even arranging for a mistress stand-in to provide the necessary evidence without excessive scandal. Divorce by mutual arrangement disguised as moral outrage. The legal team operated with the secrecy of a military operation. Alva's lawyer later boasted about keeping court records sealed, noting with satisfaction that journalists were indignant not to be able to get any of the particulars, and that there has been no filth in sight. The whole thing has been kept profoundly secret. In an era when the penny press turned divorce trials into public entertainment, this discretion was both unusual and strategic. The financial settlement rewrote the rules for high society divorces. Alva secured an estimated $10 million, a sum that would make modern prenuptial lawyers weep with joy, along with custody of their 3 children and several properties, including Marble House. This unprecedented arrangement demonstrated both the vastness of the Vanderbilt fortune and Alva's extraordinary negotiating position. The social consequences were swift and severe. Society women cut Alva at church, pretending not to see her with a thoroughness that would make modern ghosting seem amateur. Invitations vanished, doors closed, and the social world she had conquered through decades of careful maneuvering seemed to crumble overnight. Yet unlike most divorced women who faced permanent social exile, Alva had prepared her counterattack. With vast wealth, multiple properties, and most importantly, a strategic brilliance that had already conquered society once, she was uniquely positioned for a comeback. Her position was strengthened by 2 crucial factors. She had initiated the divorce rather than suffering the humiliation of abandonment, and the grounds were William's infidelity rather than any moral failing of her own. Even while navigating social rehabilitation, Alva orchestrated another triumph: the marriage of her daughter Consuelo to Charles Spencer Churchill, the 9th Duke of Marlborough. Scheduled for November 1895, just 8 months after her divorce, this transatlantic alliance represented the ultimate social achievement, merging American industrial wealth with European aristocratic lineage. The arrangement had just one significant flaw. Consuelo had absolutely no desire to marry the Duke. She had fallen for Winthrop Rutherford, a young American man, but Alva would not be denied her aristocratic son-in-law. According to historical accounts, she effectively imprisoned her daughter, threatened to shoot Rutherford, and claimed she would die of a heart attack if Consuelo refused to marry the Duke. Maternal manipulation that would make modern therapists fill entire journals. This created a situation dripping with irony. Alva, recently divorced and socially ostracized, was orchestrating one of the Gilded Age's most prestigious marriages. William reportedly spent $10 million on the arrangement, essentially matching Alva's divorce settlement. The Duke, for his part, made no pretense about his motivation, openly seeking Consuelo's substantial dowry to renovate his ancestral home, Blenheim Palace. While arranging her daughter's unwanted marriage, Alva was cultivating a relationship that would soon provide her social redemption. Her connection to Oliver Hazard Perry Belmont, whether it began before or after her divorce, was evolving beyond friendship. As New York society was still reeling from the divorce scandal, Alva was preparing yet another social grenade that would explode convention and complete her remarkable comeback. The woman who had rewritten society's rules was about to prove that even divorce couldn't stop her social dominance, and in doing so, would create a template for wealthy women's independence that would help reshape American society. Just when society thought Alva had exhausted her capacity for scandal, she pulled her most audacious move yet. In January 1896, barely 10 months after her divorce, she married Oliver Hazard Perry Belmont. Society matrons who had just finished clutching their pearls over the divorce now found themselves in need of smelling salts. Gossip erupted like Mount Vesuvius about how long this relationship had existed. Rumours dating back to 1888 suggested William had once discovered Belmont hiding in a closet in their home, a social faux pas slightly more serious than using the wrong fork at dinner. William allegedly used this discovery to justify his own extramarital activities, creating a marital standoff of mutual infidelity among the elite. Whether these rumours were founded or not, Alva's remarriage accomplished something remarkable. It restored her social standing with the efficiency of a magic trick. As Mrs. Belmont, she was mysteriously acceptable in the very drawing rooms that had banned her as a divorced woman. She became mistress of Belcourt Castle, Belmont's enormous Newport mansion, giving her 2 palatial Newport residences within strolling distance, a real estate portfolio that would make modern billionaires envious. For Alva, the restoration was complete, but for Consuelo, married life was proving less than fairy tale perfect. The Duke of Marlborough, having secured his American dollars, showed little interest in the American bride attached to them. The marriage that had cost William $10 million and Consuelo her happiness would eventually end in separation in 1960 and formal divorce in 1921. The defining transformation in Alva's life came in 1908 when Oliver Belmont died, leaving her a wealthy widow. Rather than retreating into conventional mourning, she underwent a metamorphosis as dramatic as a butterfly, emerging from a chrysalis made of dollar bills. From social climber to social reformer, she embraced women's suffrage with the same tactical brilliance she had once applied to storming Mrs. Astor's ballroom. In 1909, she opened Marble House, once a monument to her social ambition, for a suffrage symposium, and founded the Political Equality League to support pro-suffrage politicians. The woman who had once spent millions on marble palaces now redirected her resources toward securing the vote for women. Her conversion to the cause wasn't merely fashionable dabbling. In 1912, she led the Political Equality Division of the Women's Vote Parade in New York City. By 1916, she had co-founded the National Woman's Party with Alice Paul, organizing White House picketing campaigns that brought unprecedented attention to the suffrage movement. The strategic genius that had once orchestrated the legendary 1883 costume ball now planned political demonstrations with equal effectiveness. Just as she had forced Mrs. Astor to acknowledge her by hosting an irresistible event, she now pressured politicians through carefully orchestrated campaigns. She served as the National Woman's Party's president until 1933 and purchased its headquarters in Washington, D.C., now preserved as the Belmont Paul Women's Equality National Monument. Alva's wealth, derived from both her Vanderbilt divorce settlement and Belmont inheritance, made her the primary financial engine behind the militant wing of the suffrage movement. The financial independence her divorce had secured enabled her to fund controversial tactics without fear of economic reprisal. In January 1917, she organized the first White House picketing campaign, resulting in numerous arrests that generated valuable publicity for the cause. While Alva reinvented herself as a suffragist, William retreated to France, built a chateau in Normandy, established a horse racing stable near Deauville, and remarried Anne Harriman in 1903. He died in 1920, leaving a legacy primarily connected to his wealth and racing interests rather than social or political impact. Alva's remarkable transformation from Gilded Age social climber to pioneering suffragist contributed significantly to the passage of the 19th Amendment in 1920, and she continued advocating for women's equality until her death in Paris in 1933. Her scandalous divorce, once seen as social suicide, ultimately provided the independence and resources that enabled her most significant contributions to American society. The woman who had once built marble monuments to social ambition ultimately helped build something far more lasting, a more equal America. In case you hadn't heard, there's a special category of troublemaker reserved for women who possess both extraordinary privilege and the dangerous combination of intelligence and boredom. Indeed, Flora Bigelow represented the Gilded Age's most lethal variety of this species, a diplomat's daughter with access to the highest levels of American society and absolutely no intention of using that access in ways her family considered appropriate. Born into the kind of intellectual environment where political reformers debated Reconstruction policies over dinner, Flora absorbed lessons in power and influence that most women of her generation never glimpsed. The problem arose when she applied those lessons to her own life with the same strategic thinking her father used in international diplomacy. Except her battlefield was New York's social hierarchy, rather than European political negotiations. Society observers noted her restlessness during the elaborate rituals designed to showcase eligible young women, as if the carefully choreographed events felt insufficient for someone with her expansive ambitions. They were witnessing the early stages of what would become one of the most audacious social transformations in American history, though at the time it simply looked like a brilliant young woman who refused to be satisfied with conventional expectations. In today's episode of Old Money Allure, I'll take you through how Flora turned her family's diplomatic training into weapons for conquering territories no American woman had ever successfully claimed. In the autumn of 1885, as New York's high society gathered in the opulent ballrooms of Fifth Avenue for the social season's most anticipated debuts, Flora Bigelow commanded attention in ways that made the city's established matrons simultaneously proud and deeply uneasy. At 16 years old, she possessed what contemporary newspapers would later describe as unusual individuality, combined with both courageous and imaginative spirit, qualities that set her apart from the demure, obedient daughters typically presented to society. Her debut took place at the family's fortress-like brownstone at 21 Gramercy Park, one of Manhattan's most exclusive addresses, where the Bigelow name carried the weight of diplomatic prestige and intellectual distinction. Flora's father, John Bigelow Sr., had served as United States consul in Paris during the Civil War, where his diplomatic maneuvering had prevented French support for the Confederacy, an achievement that cemented the family's position within America's political elite. The Bigelow fortune, while not rivaling the industrial titans like the Vanderbilts or Morgans, provided substantial wealth that supported their dual existence between their Gramercy Park residence and their pastoral country estate called the Squirrels in Highland Falls, New York. What distinguished Flora from her contemporaries was not merely her family's prominence, but her extraordinary accomplishments that defied the era's rigid expectations for young women. She had mastered the zither, an exotic stringed instrument that required both technical skill and artistic sensitivity, and demonstrated theatrical flair that suggested creative ambitions beyond the typical accomplishments designed merely to enhance marital prospects. Her education had unfolded in the informal academy established within J.P. Morgan's Madison Avenue mansion, where she studied alongside the children of industrial titans under the tutelage of Clara B. Spence, who emphasized elocution, classical literature, and musical training. This rarefied educational environment exposed Flora to a level of intellectual discourse typically reserved for men, while her family's frequent European sojourns during her father's diplomatic postings had given her a cosmopolitan sensibility, rare among American society women. Her mother, Jane Tunis Pulteney Bigelow, had transformed their homes in both Paris and New York into salons where figures like William Cullen Bryant and Samuel J. Tilden debated Reconstruction-era policies, immersing Flora in the language of power from her earliest years. By her debut, Flora embodied the fundamental contradiction of Gilded Age womanhood, a product of unparalleled privilege and intellectual cultivation, yet expected to channel her considerable talents into the narrow confines of marriage and domesticity. Observers noted her restlessness during the elaborate rituals of her coming-out season, as if the carefully choreographed events designed to showcase eligible young women felt insufficient for her expansive ambitions. Her beauty was undeniable, but it was her sharp wit and fearless conversation that made her simultaneously the most sought-after and most dangerous young woman in New York society. While other debutantes focused on securing advantageous marriages, Flora seemed more interested in testing the boundaries of what was socially acceptable for a woman of her standing. The same qualities that made her the most daring, most original, cleverest woman in New York would soon lead her down a path that would scandalize her family's social circle and force her to seek refuge in the most unlikely of places. Following her triumphant debut season, Flora married Charles Stewart Dodge in 1885, securing her position within one of America's wealthiest industrial dynasties, built on lumber and mining fortunes. The union represented a textbook example of Gilded Age elite consolidation, merging the Bigelow family's diplomatic prestige with the Dodge family's substantial industrial wealth, in a marriage that satisfied both families' social and financial aspirations. The couple established their residence within the familiar confines of the Bigelow family home at 21 Gramercy Park, where Flora had grown up surrounded by the intellectual discourse and political influence that had shaped her formative years. Their daughter Lucy Bigelow Dodge arrived in 1890, followed 4 years later by their son John Bigelow Dodge in 1894, completing what appeared from the outside to be a perfect Gilded Age family. Yet beneath the veneer of marital success, Flora found herself increasingly constrained by the conventional expectations of upper-class wifehood that seemed to diminish her intellectual gifts and creative ambitions. Despite producing 2 children who would later achieve remarkable success, Lucy becoming a renowned theremin soloist and founder of the prestigious Carrymore Music Festival, and John becoming a decorated British military officer, Flora's own identity seemed to disappear within the traditional roles of wife and mother. Contemporary observers noted her extraordinary talents that transcended typical feminine accomplishments of the era. She was recognized as a wonderful musician whose skills extended far beyond the drawing room performances expected of society ladies, demonstrating genuine artistic ability that suggested professional potential. Her reputation as a graceful dancer, expert horsewoman, and captivating storyteller indicated a woman of exceptional physical and intellectual capabilities, who might have pursued any number of professional careers had such opportunities been available to women of her class. Perhaps most tellingly, Flora had begun writing plays and short stories, channeling her creative energies into literary pursuits that offered some outlet for her artistic ambitions while remaining within the bounds of acceptable feminine accomplishment. Yet even these creative endeavours felt insufficient to a woman of Flora's intellectual capacity and restless spirit, who had been raised in an environment where political discourse and cultural debate were daily realities. The contrast between her stimulating childhood, surrounded by diplomats, writers, and political reformers, and her current existence as a conventional society matron, created an internal tension that grew more pronounced with each passing year. Charles Dodge, while providing material comfort and social position, apparently could not offer the intellectual partnership that Flora craved, leaving her feeling increasingly isolated despite her privileged circumstances. The couple's residence at 21 Gramercy Park, once the site of her family's vibrant salon culture, now felt more like a gilded prison where Flora's considerable talents went unrecognised and underdeveloped. By 1900, after 15 years of marriage, Flora's dissatisfaction had reached a crisis point that would soon force her to make choices that would shock New York society and transform her from respected matron into scandalous divorcee. Her growing restlessness coincided with broader cultural changes affecting American women, as the new century brought increasing discussion of women's rights, and the emerging possibility that marriage need not be the only path to fulfillment for women of talent and ambition. In January 1903, Flora Bigelow Dodge made a decision that would forever alter her standing in New York society. She boarded a westbound train to Sioux Falls, South Dakota, to join the infamous divorce colony that had become a magnet for wealthy Americans seeking to escape unhappy marriages. New York State's restrictive divorce laws, which permitted dissolution only on grounds of adultery, left Flora with no legal avenue to end her 16-year marriage to Charles Dodge within her home state. South Dakota offered some of the most permissive divorce laws in the country, requiring only a brief residency period before granting divorces on various grounds, including incompatibility and cruelty. The journey to Sioux Falls represented more than a legal maneuver. It was Flora's declaration of independence from the social conventions that had confined her remarkable talents within the narrow boundaries of conventional wifehood. She settled into a luxurious four-room suite at the prestigious Cataract House Hotel, which had become headquarters for the divorce colony and the temporary home of numerous wealthy women seeking their freedom. The divorce colony had become a subject of intense national debate, with critics arguing that it threatened the stability of American marriage and family structures, while progressive voices defended women's rights to escape unhappy unions. Flora and her fellow residents found themselves at the centre of what historians would later describe as a heated national debate over the future of American marriage, with their personal choices becoming symbols in larger cultural wars about women's rights and social change. The women were portrayed in the press as both victims deserving sympathy and villains undermining traditional values, their every movement scrutinized by journalists eager to expose the private dramas of America's wealthy elite. Flora's presence in the colony was particularly noteworthy because of her family's prominence and her own reputation as a society leader, making her case a touchstone for broader discussions about women's changing roles in American society. Her pursuit of what she termed a dignified Dakota divorce represented a calculated attempt to maintain her social standing while obtaining her legal independence, a delicate balance that few women had successfully achieved. Unlike many of her predecessors who had been forced to sacrifice their reputations for their freedom, Flora sought to demonstrate that a woman of intelligence and social prominence could navigate divorce without permanently destroying her future prospects. The legal proceedings moved swiftly by the standards of the era, with Flora's divorce from Charles Dodge finalized in 1902, granting her custody of both children and restoring her legal independence after nearly 2 decades of marriage. Yet even as she celebrated her legal victory, Flora understood that her return to New York would require careful rehabilitation of her reputation among a society that viewed divorce as a moral failing, regardless of its legal legitimacy. The months in Sioux Falls had given her time to contemplate her future, and she returned to New York with ambitious plans that would soon scandalize society even more than her divorce had. Her experience in the divorce colony had connected her with other wealthy women who had successfully reinvented themselves after ending unhappy marriages, providing both inspiration and practical guidance for her own social resurrection. Within 3 years, Flora would orchestrate a remarriage so strategically brilliant that it would not only restore her social position, but elevate her to heights she could never have achieved as Mrs. Charles Dodge. In 1905, just 3 years after her scandalous divorce, Flora achieved what seemed impossible: complete social rehabilitation through her strategic marriage to Lionel George William Guest, a member of one of Britain's most politically connected aristocratic families. This union represented far more than romantic attachment. It was Flora's masterful entry into the highest levels of British aristocracy through her marriage to a first cousin of Winston Churchill and member of the influential Guest dynasty. Lionel Guest brought impeccable credentials to the marriage as the fourth son of Ivor Guest, 1st Baron Wimborne, and Lady Cornelia Spencer Churchill, daughter of John Spencer Churchill, 7th Duke of Marlborough. The Guest family had accumulated vast wealth through the iron and steel industry during the 18th and 19th centuries, successfully transforming their industrial fortune into aristocratic prominence through strategic marriages and political involvement. Flora's new husband connected her directly to the heart of British political power, with his brother Ivor Churchill Guest serving as one of the last Lords Lieutenant of Ireland and holding various government positions, including Paymaster General under H. Asquith. Another brother, Frederick Guest, had established himself as a prominent politician, while their cousin Winston Churchill was already emerging as one of Britain's most dynamic political figures. The marriage allowed Flora to completely reinvent herself within British high society, transforming from scandalous American divorcee to respected member of the aristocracy, with connections to the highest levels of government and society. The couple initially moved to Montreal, where Guest maintained mining and hotel interests, before settling permanently in London, where they enjoyed an active social life both in the capital and at their seaside home near Ferring. Flora's friendship with Mary Leiter, the American heiress who had become Vicereine of India through her marriage to George Curzon, likely influenced her understanding of how American women could successfully navigate British aristocratic society. Her integration into British society was so complete that she regularly appeared in the court circular column of the Times, marking her attendance at the most exclusive social and charitable functions reserved for the aristocratic elite. The transformation was remarkable. The woman who had shocked New York society by seeking divorce in Sioux Falls had become a respected figure in London's most exclusive circles, accepted by royalty and aristocracy alike. Flora's success reflected broader changes in British society under King Edward VII, who had revolutionised aristocratic culture by opening it to Americans, foreign plutocrats, and others previously excluded from traditional noble circles. Her remarkable journey from diplomatic daughter to scandalous divorcee to British aristocrat demonstrated both her exceptional social intelligence and the unprecedented opportunities available to wealthy American women during this transformative period. Yet even as Flora celebrated her aristocratic triumph, she remained fundamentally the same intellectually ambitious woman who had chafed against conventional constraints, now channeling her talents into the sophisticated world of British high society. Her successful integration would soon be tested by global events that would require her to leverage her new aristocratic connections in ways she could never have anticipated during her difficult years in New York. Flora's aristocratic life flourished under the patronage of King Edward VII, whose revolutionary social policies had transformed British society by welcoming Americans, foreign plutocrats, and Jews into previously exclusive aristocratic circles. The King's establishment of the cosmopolitan Marlborough House set in the 1870s had created, in effect, a second court that welcomed individuals previously excluded from traditional British aristocracy, making Flora's integration possible. Edward VII particularly enjoyed the company of American women because they are original and bring a little fresh air into society. They are livelier, better educated, and less hampered by etiquette, providing royal endorsement for Flora's successful social transformation. Her new aristocratic status enabled her to pursue intellectual interests that had been constrained during her years as a conventional New York society matron, as she later wrote novels and bred Pekingese dogs while maintaining her position in London's most exclusive circles. The breeding of Pekingese dogs was particularly notable, as this exotic Chinese breed represented the kind of cosmopolitan interest that characterized Edward VII's modernized aristocracy and Flora's continued engagement with international culture. When World War I erupted in 1914, Flora immediately leveraged her family's political connections by writing directly to Winston Churchill to secure a commission for her stepson, demonstrating how her aristocratic transformation had provided access to Britain's highest political leadership. Her husband Lionel served with distinction during the war, joining the Royal Navy Volunteer Reserve before transferring to the Royal Flying Corps and ending the conflict as a major at the Air Ministry, while Flora contributed through extensive charitable work. Flora's children from her first marriage achieved remarkable success that validated her earlier sacrifice of social position for independence. Lucy became a renowned theremin soloist who founded the prestigious Carrymore Music Festival, while John became a decorated British military officer. John's military career exemplified the complete integration of American talent into British excellence, as he left the United States around 1915 to become a British citizen so he could join the Royal Air Force, serving with distinction in both World Wars. His most famous exploit occurred during World War II, when he became one of the legendary Great Escapers at Stalag Luft 3, participating in the construction of 3 underground tunnels and successfully escaping through one of the 348-foot-long passages. Lucy's initial rebellion against conventional expectations, disappearing from Flora's London home in 1913 and telling reporters she was considering a career on the stage, echoed her mother's earlier defiance of social conventions. Her eventual marriage to Walter Tower Rosen created one of America's most significant cultural legacies through their development of the Carrymore Estate and its renowned music festival, which continues to enrich American cultural life today. Flora lived until 1964, reaching the remarkable age of 95, while maintaining her position as a respected figure in British society and remaining a unique and independent thinker until her death. Her extraordinary journey from diplomatic daughter to scandalous divorcee to British aristocrat demonstrated that exceptional women could successfully navigate even the most restrictive social conventions through intelligence, determination, and strategic thinking. The transformation also illustrated how King Edward VII's social revolution had created genuine opportunities for transnational elite formation, enabling talented individuals to transcend national boundaries and achieve positions previously determined solely by birth. Flora's legacy endures through her children's achievements and her demonstration that women of intelligence and ambition could successfully challenge social conventions without permanently sacrificing their prospects for happiness and fulfillment. Her story reveals how the intersection of personal courage, strategic thinking, and favourable historical circumstances could enable remarkable transformations even within the rigid social hierarchies of the Gilded Age and Edwardian era. The most dangerous place for a beautiful woman in Gilded Age America wasn't a dark alley or a rough neighbourhood. It was a yacht party filled with wealthy gentlemen competing for her attention. High society gatherings might have featured crystal champagne flutes and string quartets, but they operated by rules more ruthless than any criminal underworld. When aristocratic men discovered they couldn't purchase the one thing they truly wanted, their response often made street thugs look positively civilized by comparison. The combination of unlimited resources, scientific knowledge, and wounded pride created a toxic mixture that could destroy lives with surgical precision. One woman learned that choosing love over money in these circles doesn't just mean giving up luxury. It means becoming the unwitting centre of a revenge plot, so elaborate it would have impressed medieval poisoners. Her romantic decisions would ultimately expose how thin the veneer of civilization becomes when privilege meets rejection. In today's episode of Old Money Allure, I'll take you through a love story that became a masterclass in how wealth and jealousy can turn deadly. On a sun-drenched afternoon in 1897, aboard the luxurious yacht Monhegan, cruising the pristine waters off Maine's coast, a chance encounter would set in motion a chain of events culminating in double murder and one of America's most notorious criminal trials. Blanche Chesbrough, an enchanting, aspiring opera singer from Lebanon, Pennsylvania, possessed the rare combination of breathtaking beauty and genuine musical talent that made her the centre of attention wherever New York's social elite gathered. Born around 1874 to James Francis Chesbrough and Harriet Newell Crumb, she had arrived in Manhattan with dreams of operatic stardom, performing with the Musical Arts Society at the prestigious Carnegie Hall despite her family's modest financial circumstances. Though contemporary critics suggested her vocal abilities were somewhat limited, her ethereal presence and captivating stage manner had already begun opening doors among the city's cultural patrons who appreciated both her artistic aspirations and her striking appearance. At that fateful Maine yachting party, she met Roland Burnham Molyneux, heir to one of Brooklyn's most distinguished families and son of Civil War General Edward Leslie Molyneux, whose military service had elevated the family to prominence within New York's established society. Roland, born in 1866, represented everything that Gilded Age America celebrated: wealth, breeding, education, and social connections that opened every door in the city's most exclusive circles. His residence at the family's fashionable Fort Greene address at 117 Fort Greene Place reflected their status among Brooklyn's aristocratic families, while his membership in Manhattan's prestigious Knickerbocker Athletic Club provided entree to the city's most influential gentlemen. Working as a chemist at his father's successful paint company, F.W. DeVoe and C.T. Reynolds, Roland possessed specialized knowledge of exotic chemicals and rare compounds used in manufacturing processes, expertise that would later prove devastatingly significant. His access to dangerous substances like cyanide of mercury, routinely employed in paint production, distinguished him from typical wealthy young men who dabbled in business without acquiring technical skills. Roland's lifestyle epitomized turn-of-the-century privilege: summers yachting in Bar Harbor, winters attending exclusive social functions, and year-round participation in the rarefied world of Manhattan's elite clubs and societies. When he introduced Blanche to his close friend Henry Crossman Barnett at various Knickerbocker Club gatherings, Roland inadvertently orchestrated what would become his own romantic undoing. Barnett, a 32-year-old stockbroker with offices at 19 Broad Street, possessed the kind of charm and worldly sophistication that immediately captivated the beautiful singer. Described as having brown hair, blue eyes, and a neatly trimmed moustache, complementing what observers delicately termed a decided paunch, Barnett had joined the athletic club, hoping to improve his physical condition, but instead discovered something infinitely more compelling. The attraction between Blanche and Henry was instantaneous and overwhelming, transforming Roland's trusted friend into his most dangerous rival. Blanche would later describe Henry's influence over her as irresistible, recalling how he had swept me off my feet from their very first meeting. Their relationship quickly deepened beyond mere flirtation, becoming an intimate connection that would ultimately seal Henry's fate while binding Blanche to a nightmare from which she would struggle to escape. October 1898 brought a pivotal moment that would transform romantic disappointment into murderous obsession when Roland Molyneux, confident in his wealth and social position, formally proposed marriage to Blanche Chesbro. His proposal represented more than romantic desire. It embodied the entitled expectation of a man accustomed to acquiring whatever he coveted through the simple application of privilege and financial resources. Roland's shock was profound when Blanche rejected his offer with devastating directness, declaring without equivocation that her heart belonged entirely to Henry Barnett. For a man raised to believe that his aristocratic heritage and substantial fortune guaranteed success in all endeavours, this rejection struck at the very foundation of his identity and self-worth. The humiliation festered within Roland's mind, transforming wounded pride into something far more sinister as he contemplated the unthinkable reality that his closest friend had succeeded where he had failed. Late in October 1898, Henry Barnett received what appeared to be a routine promotional sample at his Knickerbocker Athletic Club address. A small tin of Kutnow's improved effervescent powder marketed as a harmless digestive remedy. Such unsolicited samples were commonplace among pharmaceutical companies seeking to introduce their products to potential customers, making the package seem entirely unremarkable. On October 28th, Henry consumed a dose of the powder, expecting nothing more than possible relief from digestive discomfort that might assist his ongoing efforts to reduce his weight. Instead of improvement, he experienced the onset of violent illness that would persist with increasing severity until his death on November 10th, 1898, just 13 days after taking the fatal dose. During his agonizing final weeks, Henry mentioned to his attending physician, Dr. Henry Beeman Douglas, the mysterious powder he had received, providing a crucial detail that would later expose the murder plot. Dr. Douglas initially diagnosed the death as cardiac asthenia induced by diphtheric poisoning, a misattribution that allowed the crime to remain undetected for months. The symptoms of mercury poisoning closely resembled diphtheria in certain stages, creating plausible medical cover for what was actually deliberate assassination. However, Dr. Douglas had retained the powder container, and subsequent chemical analysis revealed the presence of cyanide of mercury, a rare poison accessible to someone with Rowland's specialized knowledge of industrial chemicals. When authorities later exhumed Henry's body on February 28, 1899, tissue analysis confirmed the presence of the deadly compound, establishing definitive proof of murder. Remarkably, just 8 days after Henry's death, Rowland again proposed to Blanche, perhaps calculating that her romantic dreams now necessarily involved him rather than her deceased lover. Whether motivated by grief, shock, or pragmatic recognition that her artistic ambitions required financial backing, Blanche accepted his second proposal. Their wedding took place on November 29, 1898, a mere 19 days after Henry's funeral, timing that would later appear damning to investigators and prosecutors. The unseemly haste suggested to authorities that Rowland had eliminated his romantic rival specifically to clear his path to Blanche's hand, transforming murder into a calculated courtship strategy. Blanche's transformation from aspiring opera singer to Mrs. Rowland Molyneux elevated her social status dramatically, but it also made her an unwitting participant in what prosecutors would characterize as premeditated murder. Their marriage celebration marked not a romantic triumph, but the successful conclusion of Rowland's first act of revenge, setting the stage for even deadlier schemes targeting those who had crossed his path. While Rowland's marriage to Blanche provided the romantic satisfaction he had sought through murder, his social relationships continued deteriorating due to his consuming hatred for Harry Seymour Cornish, athletic director of the Knickerbocker Club. Their antagonism had grown so intense that Rowland had resigned his membership in 1897 when fellow members refused to dismiss Cornish, whom he publicly denounced as fundamentally unsuitable for his position. Rowland's objections seemed rooted in class prejudice, viewing Cornish as representing unwelcome working-class intrusion into spaces traditionally reserved for society's elite. The holiday season of 1898 would provide Rowland with an opportunity to settle this festering grievance through methods he had already proven devastatingly effective. On December 23rd, Harry Cornish received what appeared to be an elegant Christmas gift at the Knickerbocker Athletic Club, a package that would soon demonstrate Rowland's escalating boldness in pursuing his vendettas. The beautifully presented box from Tiffany & Company contained a silver toothpick holder accompanied by a bottle labelled Emerson's Bromo Seltzer, seemingly an authentic headache remedy. Unknown to Cornish, sophisticated chemical analysis would later reveal that the bottle contained legitimate bromo seltzer powder, carefully mixed with lethal quantities of cyanide of mercury. This deadly preparation required both access to rare poisons and sufficient chemical knowledge to create an undetectable mixture, capabilities that Rowland's professional background provided in abundance. Cornish brought the gift home to his shared lodgings with 62-year-old Catherine Adams, his distant cousin, and her daughter Florence, establishing an innocent household as the setting for Rowland's next murderous scheme. The morning of December 28th brought Catherine Adams a severe headache that would tragically become her final earthly suffering. When Florence suggested using the bromo seltzer that Cornish had received as a gift, Catherine gratefully accepted what appeared to be standard household medicine. Cornish prepared the fatal dose by mixing a heaping teaspoonful of the powder with water, creating the concoction that would end an innocent woman's life within minutes of consumption. Catherine drank the entire mixture, trusting completely in what seemed like ordinary headache relief. Almost immediately she began experiencing violent reactions that brought screams, attracting the entire household, as the poison began its deadly work. The mixture reportedly emitted an almond-like odour characteristic of cyanide poisoning, though this warning sign went unrecognised by those desperately trying to help her. Medical assistance arrived quickly, but Catherine Adams died shortly after the doctor's arrival, becoming an unintended victim of Rowland's murderous campaign against Harry Cornish. Cornish himself tasted the mixture and fell ill, but prompt medical intervention by Dr. Hitchcock, who recognised cyanide poisoning symptoms, saved his life through rapid administration of antidotes. The cruel irony was unmistakable. Rowland had succeeded in committing murder, but had killed an innocent elderly woman rather than his intended target. This case of mistaken victimhood would ultimately strengthen the prosecution's case by demonstrating Rowland's callous disregard for innocent life in pursuing his personal vendettas. The Christmas gift had delivered death instead of holiday cheer, transforming what should have been a season of celebration into a tragedy that would soon expose Rowland's murderous obsessions to the full scrutiny of American justice. Catherine Adams's senseless death marked the moment when Rowland's private grievances became public crimes that would ultimately destroy his carefully constructed life of privilege and respectability. Captain McCluskey assumed command of the investigation on December 29, 1898, immediately focusing on Harry Cornish as the intended victim and seeking suspects with both motive and means for such sophisticated poisoning. Investigators quickly identified Roland Molyneux as their prime suspect based on compelling circumstantial evidence. His public feud with Cornish, his expert knowledge of exotic chemicals, his employment at a facility using cyanide of mercury, and his customer account at Tiffany where the silver toothpick holder originated. The prosecution constructed their case around cutting-edge handwriting analysis, summoning over a dozen expert witnesses to testify that identical penmanship appeared on address labels for both the Cutnow powder sent to Barnett and the Bromo seltzer package delivered to Cornish. This forensic evidence, though later questioned for reliability, represented the most advanced investigative techniques available and formed the centerpiece of what prosecutors believed was an unassailable case. Rowland's arrest on February 27, 1899, followed a coroner's inquest into Catherine Adams's death that had successfully connected her murder to Henry Barnett's earlier poisoning, revealing a pattern of calculated killing. The subsequent trial, beginning in November 1899 and concluding in February 1900, became the longest and most expensive criminal proceeding in New York history, captivating national attention. Media coverage reached unprecedented levels as newspapers engaged in fierce competition for the most sensational reporting, with the New York World and New York Journal leading the charge in what became known as yellow journalism. Prosecutor James W. Osborne built his strategy around circumstantial evidence and scientific testimony, controversially introducing details about Henry Barnett's death to establish Rowland's pattern of behaviour and demonstrate clear motive. The defence team, led by George Gordon Battle and Bartow Weeks, employed the startling strategy of presenting no witnesses or evidence, declaring simply that the prosecution has failed to establish its charge. This calculated gamble aimed to highlight weaknesses in the circumstantial case while avoiding any testimony that might provide additional ammunition for prosecutors. On February 10, 1900, the jury convicted Rowland of first-degree murder, sentencing him to death and making him one of Sing Sing's most notorious death row inmates. While awaiting execution, Rowland authored The Room with the Little Door, a haunting memoir of death row existence that criticised the criminal justice system while revealing unexpected depth and humanity. His literary efforts demonstrated intellectual capabilities that contradicted public perceptions of him as merely a pampered aristocrat, showing genuine empathy for fellow condemned prisoners from vastly different social backgrounds. On October 15, 1901, the New York Court of Appeals delivered a landmark reversal that would reshape American criminal law for generations. The appellate court ruled that introducing evidence about Henry Barnett's death violated fundamental principles of presumed innocence, since Rowland had never been formally charged with that crime. This decision established the Molyneux rule, strengthening defendants' rights by prohibiting prosecutors from introducing evidence of uncharged crimes to support their cases. Rowland's second trial began on October 13, 1902, with the prosecution significantly weakened by the exclusion of prejudicial evidence about Barnett's murder. After deliberating for merely 13 minutes, the jury acquitted Rowland on November 11, 1902, suggesting that circumstantial evidence alone was insufficient to establish guilt beyond reasonable doubt. The swift acquittal demonstrated how the appellate court's decision had fundamentally altered the case's dynamics, transforming what seemed like certain conviction into rapid exoneration. One week after Rowland's acquittal, Blanche filed for divorce in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, on November 18, 1902, citing mental cruelty as grounds for dissolving their scandal-scarred marriage. Her timing indicated careful planning, waiting until legal proceedings concluded before taking action that might have complicated Rowland's defense or forced her testimony against him. The divorce proceedings in September 1903 officially ended a union that had begun with murder and been sustained through years of imprisonment, trials, and public humiliation. Within 2 months of gaining her freedom, Blanche married Wallace D. Scott, the attorney who had represented her in the divorce, choosing both practical security and genuine affection over her traumatic past. Scott offered respectability and stability that her notorious first marriage had obliterated, providing sanctuary from the relentless publicity that had transformed her from unknown singer into America's most talked-about woman. Blanche attempted returning to entertainment in 1905, planning a vaudeville career under the name Blanche Chesebro Molyneux. But Rowland's legal threats over unauthorized use of his surname forced abandonment of her theatrical dreams. This final cruel irony demonstrated how their connection continued haunting her even after divorce, effectively destroying her last hope of reclaiming the artistic career that had originally brought her to New York. Following this setback, Blanche deliberately retreated from public attention, living quietly until her death in 1954 at age 80. Her conscious withdrawal from society reflected determination to escape the notoriety that had made her a household name throughout America during the early 1900s. Rowland attempted rebuilding his shattered life, marrying Margaret Connell in a New York courthouse ceremony on November 7, 1913. But years of imprisonment and scandal had severely damaged his mental stability. He continued writing after his release, publishing short stories in major newspapers and crafting a play titled The Man Inside, based on his prison experiences. However, the psychological strain of attempting to stage his theatrical work overwhelmed his already fragile mental condition. On September 7, 1914, Rowland was committed to an asylum following a series of devastating mental breakdowns that rendered him incapable of caring for himself. Medical authorities diagnosed his condition as paresis, a form of neurosyphilis, causing progressive mental deterioration often associated with the dissolute lifestyle he had pursued in his youth. Rowland died in institutional care on November 2, 1917, at age 51, his brilliant mind destroyed by disease that had slowly consumed his cognitive abilities. The Molyneux case established enduring legal precedents still cited in modern criminal trials, including recent high-profile cases involving similar issues of prejudicial evidence. For American society, the trial represented a watershed moment, demonstrating that wealth and privilege could not ultimately shield individuals from justice when their crimes shocked the public conscience. Blanche's story serves as a haunting reminder of how romantic choices can entangle innocent people in webs of violence beyond their control or comprehension. Her 50-year retreat from public life following the trials suggests the profound psychological scars left by her unwitting participation in one of America's most sensational criminal cases. The tragedy illustrates how quickly promising lives can be destroyed when love becomes tangled with jealousy, privilege, and the deadly capabilities of those who refuse to accept rejection. Most 19-year-old actresses worry about remembering their lines and hitting their marks on stage. Mary Nevins had bigger concerns on her mind, like how to systematically destroy one of America's most powerful political dynasties using nothing but newspapers, scandal, and a genius-level understanding of public relations. While other young women her age were learning proper etiquette and hoping to marry well, Mary was honing the dark arts of media manipulation with the precision of a chess grandmaster planning checkmate 20 moves ahead. The political establishment had no idea they were dealing with someone who understood that in the emerging age of mass media, a single determined individual could wield more power than entire congressional committees. Their fatal mistake was treating her like just another inconvenient young woman who could be managed, silenced, or simply ignored until she disappeared into historical obscurity. In today's episode of Old Money Allure, we uncover how America's most underestimated political operator taught the establishment that sometimes the most devastating attacks come from the people they least expect to fight back. In 1886, a 19-year-old aspiring actress met a teenage political prince, and their 18-day whirlwind romance would become the most reckless love story in American political history, one that would eventually topple presidential dreams. Mary Nevins from Columbus, Ohio, had no idea that her whirlwind 1886 courtship with 17-year-old James G. Blaine Jr. would become the most politically explosive love story in American history. Jamie wasn't just any rich kid with daddy issues. He was the son of James G. Blaine Sr., the charismatic, magnetic man who had dominated Republican politics as Speaker of the House, Senator, and Secretary of State. But here's the delicious irony. While his father was considered the party's most formidable presidential contender, Jamie himself was what we'd now call a complete disaster. His own father later described him with brutal honesty as the most helpless, least responsible of all his children, which, coming from a politician, was remarkably candid character assassination. Jamie had already been kicked out of multiple elite preparatory schools for an impressive array of bad behaviour, including drunkenness, petty theft, and what Victorian society delicately called dalliances. James Sr. would eventually provide an even more devastating assessment, calling his son an object of constant watchfulness to his parents, his brothers, and his sisters, a source of constant anxiety, who was as readily influenced to the wrong as the right. The secret elopement sent both families into panic mode, creating the kind of scandal that makes modern celebrity meltdowns look quaint by comparison. Despite initial family horror, the American public ate up this Romeo and Juliet story with theatrical ambition meets political royalty, though Jamie's ice-cold mother Harriet never accepted her actress daughter-in-law. The marriage became tabloid gold as James Sr. campaigned for Republican candidates throughout the fall, with newspapers treating every detail of the young couple's unconventional romance like a serialized novel. What made this story even juicier was that cracks were already showing in the fairy tale facade. By 1890, Mary had grown bored with playing the dutiful political wife and shocked everyone by moving to New York City to chase her Broadway dreams. Her theatre career ambitions were scandalous enough that when she fell seriously ill with rheumatic inflammation, the entire theatrical community rallied around her with benefit performances. The February 18th, 1890, Broadway benefit became its own source of gossip and drama within New York's entertainment circles. Mary was supposed to tour with famous producer Daniel Frohman's company during the 1889 to 1890 season, but illness derailed what could have been her big break. As her marriage to the perpetually irresponsible Jamie crumbled and her acting dreams intensified, Mary began contemplating a solution that would send seismic shocks through the entire American political establishment. She was about to prove that hell hath no fury like an ambitious actress trapped in a marriage to a political family's biggest embarrassment. Little did anyone know that this seemingly sweet love story was about to transform into the most spectacular political revenge plot of the Gilded Age. and Mary held all the cards. The revenge plot that would bring down a presidential candidate began when Mary made a shocking decision that would scandalize the nation. She was heading to America's most notorious divorce colony. By 1891, Mary had reached her absolute limit with Jamie's spectacular failures and began plotting her escape to a frontier town that newspapers breathlessly called a Mecca for the mismated. Sioux Falls, South Dakota, had become America's divorce capital thanks to revolutionary laws that made ending a marriage almost as easy as ordering room service. You just needed 90 days of residency and a good story. This prairie boomtown had transformed into a luxury destination where desperate socialites could achieve the impossible: legal freedom from marriages that would trap them forever in stuffier states. Mary joined a fascinating cast of elite refugees, including Margaret de Stewars, an Astor family descendant whose international divorce scandal was already captivating the world. The opulent Cataract House Hotel had become the unofficial headquarters of this divorce revolution, offering 5-star accommodations and discreet services for wealthy women seeking legal liberation. Mary settled into the hotel like she was planning a military campaign, spending nearly a year building her legal case while newspapers began stalking her every move with the intensity of modern paparazzi. But here's where Mary revealed her secret weapon. She possessed a genius-level understanding of media manipulation that would make today's publicists weep with envy. When her divorce proceedings finally erupted in February 1892, the Sioux Falls courtroom was absolutely packed with 250 sensation seekers who had come for the legal equivalent of a heavyweight championship fight. Mary delivered a devastating performance, accusing Jamie of abandonment and neglect, while painting a picture of marriage destroyed by his drinking, financial recklessness, and complete inability to function as an adult. The court granted her everything she wanted: custody of their 3-year-old son, alimony payments, and most importantly, complete vindication of her decision to flee. But the real bombshell came when the presiding judge publicly eviscerated the Blaine family, criticizing their unfriendliness toward Mary and declaring that their rejection had contributed significantly to the marriage's destruction. This judicial smackdown of one of America's most powerful political dynasties made front-page headlines across the nation and gave Mary's story official credibility. The judge's harsh words were particularly devastating because they came from a legal authority who had heard all the evidence and concluded that the mighty Blaine family were the real villains in this drama. Mary had achieved the impossible. She'd not only escaped her marriage, but had secured a legal victory that positioned her as the innocent victim of political family dysfunction. As news of the divorce and the judge's brutal assessment of the Blaine family spread like wildfire across America's newspapers, political insiders began whispering about potential damage to James Sr.'s presidential ambitions. The timing was absolutely catastrophic for the veteran politician, who was gearing up to challenge President Benjamin Harrison for the 1892 Republican nomination. But Mary's courtroom triumph was merely the opening act in a media war that would prove far more destructive than anyone could have imagined, and she was just getting started. The courtroom victory that destroyed James Sr.'s political future began when he made the fatal mistake of underestimating a 19-year-old actress who turned out to be as skilled at using newspapers to her advantage as any political pro. This was a man who had survived decades of brutal political warfare, corruption scandals, and presidential campaigns, yet he was about to be systematically destroyed by his former daughter-in-law's media genius. James Sr.'s first strategy was classic old-school politics: maintain dignified silence and hope the scandal would fade before the Republican nomination fight began in earnest. But Mary was already 3 moves ahead, launching a sophisticated media campaign that portrayed her as a wronged young mother, abandoned by a heartless political dynasty drunk on power. Her understanding of press manipulation was so advanced, it left the experienced politician scrambling to catch up, as she courted reporters and shaped coverage with the precision of a seasoned campaign strategist. By February 28, 1892, the mounting pressure forced Blaine Sr. to abandon his strategy of noble silence and launch what newspapers gleefully described as a vitriolic open letter offensive against his former daughter-in-law. His explosive public statement accused Mary of tricking Jamie into a secret marriage and painted her as a manipulative actress who had deliberately targeted his vulnerable teenage son for personal gain. This attack was a spectacular political miscalculation that backfired immediately and devastatingly, starting with the alienation of Catholic voters who were outraged by his assault on Mary's faith. Mary's counterattack on March 2nd, 1892, was a masterpiece of political theatre that put the powerful politician on the defensive while positioning herself as the victim of a family conspiracy. Her brilliant open letter demanded that Blaine Sr. publish the complete correspondence between her and Jamie within 10 days, or face her public release of Jamie's most embarrassing letters. The threat was devastating because everyone knew Jamie's letters would be filled with evidence of his drinking, financial disasters, and general incompetence as both husband and human being. This public chess match escalated into a full-scale media war that dominated front pages across America, with each side trying to destroy the other through increasingly personal and vicious attacks. Headlines began revealing humiliating details about Jamie being a wayward, spoiled young man with a history of drunkenness, petty theft and dalliances, who had been expelled from at least 3 prestigious preparatory schools. The press coverage exposed the Blaine family's dirty laundry, including Jamie's pathetic financial dependence on his parents and his complete failure to support his own wife and child. Mary's media strategy proved so devastatingly effective that public opinion increasingly viewed her as the clear victor in this campaign between the divorcee and the diplomat. The scandal reached nuclear levels when rumours exploded that Richard C. Kerens and 5 other Blaine supporters had secretly raised $65,000 to buy Mary's silence by purchasing her most damaging letters. Although Blaine Sr. frantically denied these bribery allegations in a June 8, 1892 letter to the New York World, the controversy continued to metastasize and destroy his reputation for integrity. The alleged bribery scheme suggested that Blaine's inner circle was so desperate to contain Mary's destruction that they were willing to pay enormous sums to silence her, making the entire family appear both corrupt and guilty. As the crucial 1892 Republican National Convention approached, political observers began questioning whether Blaine Sr. could possibly survive the public relations apocalypse that his own family dysfunction had created. But Mary's media campaign had already achieved something far more devastating than anyone realized. She had weaponized publicity itself against one of America's most powerful politicians, and the final blow was about to fall. The final destruction of James G. Blaine Sr.'s presidential ambitions came with mathematical precision on June 4, 1892, when the Republican National Convention delivered a humiliation so complete it ended decades of political dominance. Despite his legendary political skills and formidable party connections, Blaine Sr. managed only a pathetic 182 1/6 delegate votes, while President Benjamin Harrison crushed him with 535 1/6 votes on the first ballot. The divorce scandal had systematically destroyed Blaine Sr. E.C.'s most precious political commodity. His carefully cultivated image of moral authority and personal integrity that had sustained his career through multiple corruption scandals. Political insiders understood that while other factors contributed to his defeat, health problems and the lingering stench of the Mulligan Letters corruption scandal, Mary's media war had delivered the killing blow to his presidential dreams. The public feud had exposed the Blaine family's spectacular dysfunction in the most humiliating way imaginable, with newspapers across America chronicling every embarrassing detail of Jamie's failures and his father's increasingly frantic damage control attempts. Mary had proven that individual determination and media savvy could topple even the most entrenched political dynasties, demonstrating how a strategic young woman could challenge powerful institutions and win. Her refusal to be intimidated by political pressure and her sophisticated manipulation of press coverage had pioneered tactics that would become standard weapons in future political warfare. The scandal marked a turning point in American politics, showing how mass circulation newspapers could shape public opinion and destroy political careers through relentless coverage of personal scandals. Following his convention humiliation, Blaine Senior's political career essentially ended in disgrace, though he limped through his remaining time as Secretary of State until the Harrison administration concluded. The man who had been the Republican Party's most feared presidential contender for over a decade had been systematically destroyed by a 19-year-old actress who refused to play the role of submissive victim. Mary, meanwhile, demonstrated her remarkable resilience by quickly rebuilding her life and social standing despite the national controversy and powerful enemies she had created. She remarried with impressive speed and success, wedding doctor. William Tillinghast Bull, on May 30th, 1893, in Manhattan, barely a year after her divorce was finalized. Her successful new marriage proved her ability to overcome scandal and social ostracism while pursuing both her acting career and comfortable upper-class lifestyle. Mary lived prosperously until her death on February 8, 1911, in Newport, Rhode Island, at age 44, having completely reinvented herself as a respectable society matron. Her victory became legendary as a symbol of the cultural revolution sweeping the Gilded Age, when traditional power structures were being challenged by new technologies, evolving social norms, and the democratization of information. Mary's case anticipated future women's rights movements and proved how individual women could use personal choices and public actions to shape major political outcomes despite being formally excluded from political power. The divorce scandal ultimately demonstrated that in the emerging age of mass media and public opinion, even America's most powerful political figures were vulnerable to destruction by unexpected opponents, especially determined individuals who understood how to weaponize publicity. James G. Blaine Senior's presidential dreams didn't die in Congress or on campaign trails, but in newspaper columns, murdered by a brilliant young woman who turned scandal into a political weapon and refused to disappear quietly into historical obscurity. Mary Nevins Blaine had achieved the impossible. She had single-handedly destroyed a presidency that never was, proving that in America even teenage actresses could topple political giants if they played their cards right. The spectacular clash between Mary Nevins and James G. Blaine Sr. revealed how the Gilded Age's rigid social structures were already beginning to crack under pressure from new media technologies and changing gender expectations. What began as a simple teenage elopement evolved into a case study of how determined individuals could challenge established power through strategic use of publicity and public sympathy.